Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well, then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon Weinstein. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. So this is one of my favorite types of episodes. What we're going to do today is invite someone onto the show who actually reached out to me via LinkedIn after hearing me on another podcast. He had so many great questions around what it takes to hire a really good accountant, tips on making sure that you have a really good relationship with them and that you're doing effective onboarding with them. So we're going to unpack that today and on the next episode to have a two-part series with Tobias, because I guarantee you that if you're listening to this right now, you probably have the same questions he has. And a lot of people have these questions to me in private, but Tobias was gracious enough to accept my invitation to come on the show and ask these questions and really have this conversation with me live so you can hear it. And I've answered this question countless times to people in private DMs or my text message or whatever it is. And I'm really excited for you to hear my answers to this now, because this is going to be such a game changer for you. If you are in the early stages of entrepreneurship and you're like, I know I need help, I don't know how to effectively do that. Or if you're sitting there thinking, I hired an accountant, I feel like I got screwed. They didn't really do what I asked them to do. They didn't meet my expectations, et cetera, et cetera. This is for you 100%. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from Tobias's message to me and give you a little bit of background on him. So let's see. So he shared with me, okay, we share a similar background. I've spent almost 14 years at, insert our same firm here. After spending around 16 years in corporate, I reached a point where I decided to embark on the journey of entrepreneurship. And actually, it was my wife's venture, but I joined her along the way. During this transition, I encountered challenges in finding the right accountant, and it took me nearly a year to secure one here in Georgia. Now that we've begun a new contract, I want to ensure I make the most out of our collaboration. So what Tobias was asking me about was two things. One was, what mistakes did I make in my first accountant, which you're going to hear that story on today's episode. And then the second part was, now that I feel like I have somebody who's more aligned with me, how do I have a really strong relationship with them and foster a really good environment of trust? So we're going to share with you two parts of this series. One is going to be focused on how to evaluate, how to look for the right accountant, how to search for them effectively, find the right person for you. And then the second part is going to be about onboarding, how to, once you find that person or that firm, how to effectively chat about expectations, how to onboard properly, how to make sure that there's nothing that isn't being shared so that you guys can have the most success together. And Tobias and his wife, just so you know, run an e-commerce company where they have some international customers. It's a really exciting venture for him and his wife to undertake. I'm really excited for them. And I'm so happy that he reached out, because this is going to be such an impactful conversation for those of you listening as well. Let's dive in. Hey, Tobias, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So for those of you listening, Tobias reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he had a bunch of questions for me around hiring an accountant, and they were such good questions. And I was like, we have to answer this on the show. And he graciously accepted my invitation to come on and share a little bit about his story, what he's experienced in his business. And we're actually going to answer all of his questions here. And by the way, I haven't answered all these questions yet for him, so he's really going to just hear this for the first time right now. Tobias, you just told me a little bit about your story and your business, and we talked about, you actually have a background working at the same firm I did, which is so funny, but you left to go help your wife with her business, and especially like as the pandemic went on, you were telling me about, transitioning into this entrepreneurial mindset too, and what you had indicated was one of the first things you did was you wanted to hire an accountant, or you needed some help with that, right? Let's start there. And can you kind of unpack sort of what that experience was like to feel like, oh, we're now in this entrepreneurial small business space? Like, must have been like a learning curve, right?
Yeah, of course. It still is. It still is a learning curve. Every day learning a lot of things. Yeah, I think it all started, I think the first order of business for me was to get in the right accountant, right? but we were very last minute in getting an accountant. So it was late 2020. So we had and the primary reason why that was the first order of business for me was because we took a big hit, in our tax return in 2019. So I was like, I need to have someone telling me, what is the best way for me to file 2020. And so I met with an accountant towards the end of December, almost Christmas. And, we had a meeting and he kind of explained to me, what would be the best course of action by then, which was to file for a LLC under the S corporation. So we did that, but that was almost Christmas. So as I said, and that was the primary drive for that was to save money on tax, right? So we did that, but in retrospective, that was, as I was telling you, that wasn't the best beginning of a relationship, I guess, because one, we didn't set up like expectations and what we need from each other in terms of information about the business and the day-to-day finance, things that we needed to do. We didn't have any system by then. It was all spreadsheets. So we did file 2020. We got through 2020. And as I signed the engagement letter, what I thought I was hiring, that was what do you thought was funny? That what I thought I was hiring was more like an advisory type of service, since I knew I needed that, given I didn't know how to navigate. I never had a business before,
Right.
as you mentioned, I live all my life in corporate life, in corporate business. And so it was first time having a business. So I needed someone to kind of help me navigate through all that, not only the compliance side of things, but initially maybe the compliance, some of the paperwork that I needed to do, like filing quarterly, estimates, like having to register like annually with the Secretary of State, in Georgia, kind of thing. So that were some of the things that I had to learn as we went, and we never and I, more than one time I received like some mails from the Secretary of State, some notices from the IRS. And that was then, like all the panic, all the alarms had went off, and we needed to figure out more in a reactive kind of fashion.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was the very problematic, beginning of my relationship with an accountant, which led me to sit on this and fast forward to the day that I reached out to you, when I listened to the podcast that you were on, and I heard some of the words that you mentioned, I was like, they resonated so much with me, because everything that you said was, oh, I wish I had met her like back then, what I'm saying? So because that was just like some powerful words that you said, like, and it blew my mind when you mentioned that you open your calendar and for your clients, and no one wanted to talk about taxes during the year. They only wanted to know about the tax return, like, by the deadline, which was April 15, whatever. So yeah, so kind of like just unpacking, the reason why I'm here today. And thank you so much, by the way, for
Of course.
opening your calendar for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that you brought up that is really interesting is this difference in expectations between what you're buying and what they're selling, and what you think you're buying. And this is something everybody struggles with. And I feel like we as a profession have terrible, call it marketing, or like our menu is not very clear, because it's saying like we do tax prep, and it's implied by most people that tax work is, well, you're going to help me save money, right? You're going to tell me what to do. And there's really not a lot of direction. It's a lot of just documentation. So it's filling out the tax forms, doing the preparation, or as I put it, publishing the story, not co-authoring it. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that they're not really working with you during the year most of the time. Especially if you're paying, we'll say like under $1,000 for the whole year, you're definitely not getting a ton of advisory work from that. Yeah. And I don't think people understand that, like, the economy of that, or the fact that in general, when you go to a CPA firm's office, I would say the default is, we're going to do your taxes and nothing else, unless you specifically order something else. But the problem is people don't know that.
yeah, people didn't even know what to order. That was my case. I
Exactly.
didn't even know like what words I should use for me to get the right service that I actually need.
Hmm.
So that was, yeah, I think communication was definitely some of the problems back then. Yeah. And, I think the first topic that I put for us to one of my questions was to kind of talk a little bit about, some of the selection process, because since
Yeah.
then, so we stayed with them, this accounting firm until, like, we filed 2020, we filed 2021 with them, like, but under like really terrible like situation where then we had to fire them after we filed for 2021, because that was when we realized that I was expecting something that they were not going to give me. And so we filed 2021, and that was the end of our relationship. And then throughout like 2022 was when okay, I need to get the right accountant for me then. But then the year went by really fast, and I ended up with a few names. And that was when kind of like the selection process really started. And that was really a hassle because, where do you actually start? Right.
Right. How do you
Um,
select? How do you evaluate? And you were saying,
yeah.
like, so the first step is being aware that there is a selection process and that you
Yeah.
don't have to just like, right, you don't have to just go with the first person, the convenient person, like the person your dad uses, whatever. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the first layer is knowing you have a choice. And
Yeah.
then the second part, which is the harder part, is okay, well, how do I know a good accountant from a great accountant? Or how do I know what I'm looking for? And that's a really good question. So that was your first question you were looking at and evaluating. And what I recommend doing is really kind of envisioning what you want your interactions to look like with that person, to say, okay, what do I actually need? What do I need in my business right now? What type of communication do I prefer? How frequently do I want to talk to this person? Am I somebody who needs an email response back pretty quickly? Or am I kind of like, take your time, whatever? It really is up
Mhm.
to personalities. And it's honestly a lot like dating. It really is. Cause it's like,
Yeah.
what's your love language? Right. So it's like unpacking, okay, I communicate best via email, or I communicate best via XYZ. And then actually asking the person, what is your best method of communication to reach out to you? How often or how fast can I expect a reply back from you? Even acknowledging my message, just to acknowledge that you've received it and you're working on it.
Yeah.
How often can I book phone calls with you? And does that come at extra charges? A huge thing to evaluate, by the way, along with
Yeah.
communication, is how they charge you, how they bill you. So are they billing you on a steady monthly rate? Are they billing you based on time, an hourly rate? Are they billing you based on projects, based on completion of certain tasks? And then you'll understand their incentive for what they're spending their time doing. So
Yeah.
are you just going to charge them, or are you going to pay them for your tax return getting done? In which case, all they care about is that that thing gets done, which is also why a lot of accountants don't really go above and beyond to communicate and reach out, because they're like, I'm working on it. And again, we're all really busy, but if you have a mechanism in place to like update on status, or if you're somebody who just wants to know where things stand, and maybe you get a little nervous because maybe, and a lot of our listeners are in this position, maybe you had a bad experience with an accountant before. They didn't update you, they didn't respond back to you or communicate with you, and you
Yeah.
felt like you were in the dark. When you've
Yeah.
had those experiences, I'm going to say, tell people that. Say,
Yeah.
listen, my former accountant left me in the dark, so I'm particularly sensitive to feeling like I'm out of the loop on stuff. So I would like to be over communicated with, and I'm willing to pay whatever fee is necessary to get that level of service from you. Because if you say, this is something I highly value, they can either say, well, that's not something we provide, or they
Yeah.
can say, okay, understood, and we acknowledge that, and we'll make sure that we do that and build that into our process. But you actually want to put that in writing in the engagement letter if possible, like lay out those expectations for communication
Okay.
and for pricing, and how the pricing is based on. And that goes for tax, and that also goes for bookkeeping services too. It's about,
Yeah.
how often can I meet with you? The other thing I would ask, because usually if you're talking about a firm, usually you're going to meet with the firm owner or meet with a partner or a high level person.
Yeah.
But in reality, you're going to be
Yeah.
interacting with the staff.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Yeah.
I always tell people, if they can, and accountants don't hate me for this because I'm about to like cheat their system. is if you go in, ask outright, will you be the person I am interacting with, or will I be spending most of my time interacting with your staff? And if it's the staff, which is not a bad thing, it's actually how firms should operate. But if it's the staff, then you say, would you allow me to meet that person before we complete the engagement letter? Can
Yeah.
I meet the person? Because what I've seen happen too many times, and this includes with my husband too, is they get sold by the firm owner. The staff does all the work, and the staff is a CPA candidate who doesn't know a journal entry.
Yeah.
And they're basically paying their training fee.
Yeah.
And again, there's nothing wrong with hiring entry-level people, but you should know the level of expertise of the person working with you, the level of supervision they have, who you can go to if you're wondering questions about something. You want to know who is doing most of the work, but you also want to know who is doing most of the supervision so that you can go to that person to escalate or to kind of have the quote unquote adult conversation with and say, hey, I'm curious about this question. The staff doesn't seem to be getting it. You just want to make sure you understand who exactly is in the relationship tier with you when you're working with a firm, because usually it's more than one person. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, no, you mentioned so many interesting things right now that it's even for me, it's overwhelming for me to unpack all that. But
I know.
I guess starting with the communication, I had a really terrible relationship. And then towards the end of, as the deadline, the file deadline was approaching and I couldn't get a hold of the accountant, it was March. We were supposed to file March 15th for the business side. And
Yep.
I just, we met in February to kind of go through the numbers and see where we're at, and kind of having that to review beforehand. I reviewed everything. He reviewed everything. I had some adjustments and questions that we needed to talk through again, just as a follow-up before we filed. And the second meeting never happened. And we were approaching the deadline. I was trying to get a hold of them. And that's why I put like the remote kind of, setting like nowadays, because for me, it was nerve wracking because it wasn't a place that I could just go there and talk to them, face to face. And I couldn't call. I would call and they wouldn't answer. I would email and then they wouldn't reply. So, and then later when I finally was able to get a response from them via email, I found out that they had filed a extension request for me, which was fine, I guess, for them. But for me, one, I didn't know that. Two, I didn't want that. I wanted to resolve my tax situation right away. I didn't want, the tax to be dragging you out throughout the year, So,
Yeah.
so the communication was huge for me. And it's funny you mentioned, because one of the accountants that I met, because I went through part of the selection process was for me to meet with them like over Zoom calls and stuff. So as I was talking to one of them, she mentioned, hey, we're not big on filing, as of April 15th, we usually file extension requests for our clients. I was laughing. I'm glad you brought that up right now in our discovery call, not like in April, So I appreciate the
Yeah.
transparency. I mean, and she was like, she was flexible with that. Okay, if you happen to be a person that we had some of our clients that are really on the anxious side, are really anxious about filing, their tax right away, by the deadline. And whereas we would like to have more time to reflect on the numbers, to make sure that we're filing, the right numbers and stuff like that. So that's why we usually file an extension. That's the reason behind it. And
That's good
because we have some
communication.
client, yeah. So that was the one that I hired, because I appreciate, and of course, if you're going to have a better communication throughout the year, I'm not going to get like, in April and March as freaked out as I would be if we didn't communicate throughout the year. So let's give it a try, he's talking about communication. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, what we do is, so just so you know, this is a very typical practice for accountants, just so everyone knows when you're approaching this. This is what we do. We have a giant amount of work to do between like February and April. And if you don't want us doing your taxes at 2 a.m., then there has to be a balance, right? There has to be some people who get done on time and some people who are going to be extended. But here's the cool thing. The extension just means that you can go past the deadline. It doesn't mean you have to go till October. So most of the time, businesses will get extended because that's a March 15th deadline. And that's a hell of a crunch if you don't have all your books in order.
So what ends up happening is we get them done March 16th, 17th, 18th, 20th. We get them done, but we just need those extra few days to not create some restraint on ourselves and to kill ourselves. We just go, extend it. It doesn't cost anything to just have the extension on hand. So a lot of accountants, what they'll do is extend on March 1st or April 1st, anyone who isn't done yet, just out of a precaution, and say, we're going to extend everyone. So at least they're not going to get a penalty for not filing. But now what we can do is take our time a little bit more and not be so stressed out by the deadline. But we actually communicated that and said, this is an exercise for us to enable us to spend more thoughtful time on your return. We have no intention of going past May with your returns. However, we just need a little bit more time to spread out the workload. And we are handling them on a first come, first serve basis. Understand, I don't have an exact picture of what the line looks like, but I will call your number when you are like in the next 3. So if you're in the next 3 I'm going to do, I will tell you that we have an update for you. Stuff like that. Because when you know that type of stuff and you know when your number is going to get called or you know where you are in line, a lot of people have anxiety. A lot of people don't understand the process. And if you can just give clarity to the process, it's a huge thing. Even if, like you said, you just said they didn't, that you were frustrated that they extended you, the first people. But the second people say, that's our policy, is to extend. And you were like, I love that, because it wasn't, the extension wasn't the problem. It was the communication of it.
Yeah. So,
exactly.
So that's really a communication issue that we had back then that we're trying to avoid again, because that
I love that.
That caused a great deal of stress for us. I was going all over the place.
It's like getting ghosted. You feel like you're getting ghosted by a person. They're like,
really?
well, where do we stand? What's going on? Are you even responding to me? Are you getting these messages? And like your head spirals.
Yeah. So because I had that like trauma, in a way.
Yeah, it's an experience.
So because I had that, like one of the things that I wanted out of an accountant, and again, that's why I put the remote work question for you was, all right, what if I get someone nearby that I can just go to their office, so that, and then that would be possible for them to ghost me, right?
But that's a value thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But then what I found out was, well, at least in my experience, that's what I kind of like, I wanted to hear a little bit about that from you is it's really hard nowadays, I guess, to find like kind of like an old fashioned type of kind of relationship where you go to the door, like you knock on the door and you talk face to face to someone and go through the numbers. It's mostly, I don't know if probably that's because of the pandemic, post-pandemic kind of era that we're living in.
Mostly, yeah.
Yeah, that it's most of the accounts that I spoke to, like during the selection process, they were fully remote. Even if they were, I am in Atlanta area, not exactly Atlanta, but even if they were in Atlanta and I'm like 30 minutes from Atlanta, it's still they wouldn't have like an office for me to go to, right? So So that was one for me. And one of the questions that during the selection process that I had was, all right, so if it's all remote, then do I need an accountant from the same state that I am in? Or can I get an accountant from Washington, And
that's
that was
the difference though. You're like going outside 30 minutes. Now you're like, can I go to Washington? And it's like, well, that's a jump. Polar corner of the country. But the answer is yes. The answer is yes. So the way accountants work is, let me break this down. This is so interesting because people don't know this, and I keep forgetting to mention this, that you have no geographic boundaries when it comes to tax preparation, because tax preparation is not a service that is regulated. So you think about this, H&R Block can pretty much hire anybody, and a lot of these tax shops can pretty much hire and train anybody. You can have anybody do your taxes anywhere in the country as long as they have what's called it's a PTIN. It's an identification number. So it's like a taxpayer or tax preparer identification number, PTIN. And the PTIN says like you're registered with the IRS to prepare taxes. You do not need to be a CPA to prepare taxes. You do not need to be an enrolled agent. In fact, you don't need anything except a PTIN to go prepare taxes.
I didn't know that. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. It's actually a very low barrier to entry to do taxes, much like bookkeeping. Now, right. Which is why we have to be careful. So a lot of people, you think that because they offer taxes, they're inherently CPAs. They are not. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but you have to ask questions around their credentials in order to actually unpack that, because you can do taxes without any actual credential. And that is something to look out for. You can also do taxes in any geographic jurisdiction in the United States for anyone in the United States without any restriction. Where the restriction comes in, by the way, the only restriction we have as accountants is if you are a CPA, a certified public accountant like me. If someone asks me to do a financial statement audit and I must sign off on an opinion on their financial statements, we're talking like, mostly public companies, SEC regulated, like EY, PwC, like that level of audit. If I want to do a financial statement audit and I want to sign it, I need a CPA in the state in which I'm working. That is the only thing that you need. So other than that, anyone can pretty much do anything. Now, I know there are some exceptions to that, but like pretty much it's so much less restricted than people think it is, that you do not need anybody local. You can find anybody in the country who is qualified. And one of the things with your selection process is, what is the most important thing to you? Being able to have that face-to-face interaction. And again, there's no right answer or no wrong answer, but being able to have face-to-face interaction and meet with someone face-to-face. Or maybe they have a specialty in your industry. They understand e-commerce and international customers because that's something that you care about. Maybe it's somebody who just has a really good communication style that you like and they're really responsive. So it's almost like making a list of what you value in somebody, like the local aspect, the industry expertise, and almost creating a little scorecard. Like you're buying a house. Like, when you buy a house and you're going, I want a 3-bed, 3-bath. I want this type of granite countertops. I want this type of flooring. I want this, this, and this. There are certain things that are the must-haves, like non-negotiables, like location. And then there are certain things like the finishes, the paint colors, the yard, the porch, whatever, that can be modified and can be built and can be changed, that you're like, these are kind of the nice to haves. Without over-architecting the process, what I recommend people do is really get in tune with the must-haves for you and say, like, for me, a must-have is maybe they are local and they have my industry expertise. Okay, you may not get both of those. So if you had to choose between somebody who was remote and knew your industry like the back of their hand and somebody who was local and knew just enough about it, what one weighs heavier? And again, there's no wrong answer, but there's really not as much restriction out there in terms of the geography of it.
Love it. Like, love that insight. And what would be your thought on expertise specifically on state regulation? Because I sat with a accountant from Florida, right? And she was more knowledgeable on the industry they were on, but still she's not in the same state. And one of the things that I kept thinking about is she going to know like statewide regulation that I need for her to know? Whereas like when I spoke with the accountant that we ended up hiring, she's from Georgia. And during the discovery call, she mentioned a couple of things, like state specific things that she came across as really expert on, the regulations in our state kind of, and I that kind of gave me like, okay, she had the right authority over some of the things that I need to understand state-wise, right? What would
that's
be
a
your thought on
factor.
that? Yeah.
That's a big factor too. So, but what I would do is phrase it this way, as opposed to looking at where they're located, which is probably an indicator. I'm not going to lie. So for example, I'm based in Connecticut / Costa Rica, right? So I am all over the place, but what's really funny is I have very few clients in Connecticut. Most of my clients are in New York and California. So I'm actually really well experienced in California and New York taxes. However, you would never know that because I'm based in Connecticut. So you actually want to ask the question more around, where are most of your clients based? Or are you more experienced with a certain state's tax law? Because just because you live there doesn't inherently mean you are well-versed in that tax law, especially in this virtual world we live in. Like you said, most accountants have 100% virtual offices, which means they can take clients from anywhere. So it's where are the majority of your clients based? What tax laws are you really familiar with? What states? Because if you jump to judgment on me and said, oh, well, she doesn't know California taxes. I'm like, actually, 2/3 of my clients are in California.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really well
Awesome.
versed in those rules. So I would say don't jump to judgment on the location. Just ask, do you have experience with these state tax laws, and approximately what percentage of your clients are from that state?
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And say that's really interesting and really useful because, and that brings kind of like to my next question, still within the selection process. And that would be, say that we have our scorecard in order, right? The things that our must haves, our nice haves kind of deal. And we want, all right, I want to start like getting some names for us to call, email people out, like, getting like discovery calls and a calendar or two for us to talk to people for like 15, half an hour. How do you, what would be the best way in your experience to start off that process, going out of the door and actually looking for someone? I know most people get word of mouth, which
Right.
which is good in a way, but that can turn out to be bad, which was our previous accountant was word of mouth, right? And the current also it really is, but it's very limiting, right? When
Yeah.
you are, because you can only go as far as the people that know an accountant, right? So what I tried was, Google, like board of accountants here in Georgia, LinkedIn, you name it, right? But it's really out in the world, like, and that can be overwhelming. So what would be
Yeah.
some of the pointers that
I
you would give,
would, yeah, I would do two things. If you can think of another business owner, maybe even location agnostic. And let me back up for a second and say, you do the must-haves, right? So if the must-have
Yeah.
is somebody local, now you have started with, okay, if it has to be somebody local, now it's going to be looking locally and searching geographic areas and looking for friends in your area who can possibly recommend, and then searching the networks. Maybe it's like local town Facebook groups. And maybe it's like, hey, does anybody here have an accountant they love? I'm currently looking, and you live in this certain suburb of Atlanta, and you can share that. And one thing is, if you're going to go into like forums, like Facebook groups, and you're going to say, anyone know a good accountant? Here is a best practice. Never ask that question. And here's why, because no one knows what that means. It's like saying, know a good doctor. It's like, for what?
Yeah.
So what I would do is be specific and actually put, like, almost obnoxiously, right, currently in the market for a new tax professional, for example, looking for someone who, almost like a job description, like you're hiring somebody for your team. Think about, I'm looking for an employee, and how much information you put out there about what the qualifications are and what you're looking for. Treat it with the same respect, if not more, because they're going to see you financially naked. So you want this person to be trustworthy. So you want to make sure you're going to say, hey, I'm looking for an accountant who is super responsive via email, available to meet in person in this area, this region. Like, I believe in, if you put it out there and you're really specific about what you're looking for, somebody will go, I know just the person, because they've actually read the qualifications, instead of you putting a feeler out and saying, anyone know a good accountant? Everyone's going to say their accountant's pretty good, or they're going to name somebody or tag somebody. But if you could actually put, this is what I'm looking for, and be specific, that's going to go a really long way. Also, if you know anybody in your area or in your industry, depending on what the values are, right? If you know somebody else who's similar to you in what you value. So I know somebody else who is like, God, you don't respond to her for 2 days, she's going to be so mad. Like an inbox zero type of person who's like super on top of her communication. Be like, hey, Shannon, like if your friend Shannon is like that, it's like, hey, Shannon, who do you use? Like, if you like the person, I'm going to like the person. So it's instead of taking recommendations from the closest, the fastest, or the loudest, take recommendations from the people who are actually like you. Like, be intentional about who you're asking for those recommendations from, but also be intentional about what you're asking for by actually laying it out there and saying, I'm looking for someone with these 3 core characteristics. And ask your network, explore the network, and be really specific. And you're going to get what you ask for, Because if you ask for something generic, you're going to get something generic.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's just the right advice. Yeah. And that's something that's going to be really useful because God knows, we're just in the beginning of our relationship. So
Yeah.
I'm really hopeful that this one, we're going to stick to it and it's going to last. But,
I hope so too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to give them a chance too, because I think a lot of accounting relationships, I never blame the accountant, even though it seems like the accountant is the one always kind of painted as the villain in these stories. But there's a two-way street of communication and expectation setting. And it's like dating, where it's like, we just determine we're not a good fit for each other. But I go, we can change the ending of that story if we're willing to commit the time to saying, I want this to work out and I'm going to be intentional about maintaining the relationship. It's a very interesting service provider relationship because as accountants, our entire job is client service. And if you can make our job easier and you can make our job delightful and we enjoy serving you, you're going to get all of that poured back into you. So like you're really good to your accountant, they will be really good to you. But the same goes in the reverse. So if they feel like you are taking forever to respond, you're really difficult to get a hold of, or you're not giving them what they're asking for, they will also start to kind of put you on the chopping block list maybe of people who they really don't mind if they lose. And they may not give you that first class level service anymore. So you have to be really careful too about like, where do we stand? Like, do you simply tolerate me as a client, or do you actually wake up in the morning happy to serve me? And that's a hard question to ask, but you have to figure out kind of where you stand with them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting that you mentioned that. I usually am on the side. I usually like to be a good client. And, that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you actually. How can I be actually a good client?
I love that.
To my accountant, right? Because
I love that.
I need this to work. I need this. I actually need this to work.
Sometimes don't you wish you could just Google or ask ChatGPT what is deductible for your taxes? I wish it were that easy, but the truth is that deducting something can really vary, and it's really hard to get a straight answer for your business in particular, but I made something to help. My free tax deduction guide walks you through hundreds of example tax deductions that can apply to your business, along with a mini training on what actually makes something deductible so you can add more to your list and cater it to your specific industry or type of business. This is all for free, and it's at the link in the show notes. Go check it out. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your podcast platform. This small action goes a long way for podcasters to get our message heard by more business owners just like you. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to information about our guests and ways to get in touch with me. We'll see you on the next episode.